So originally this was supposed to be a rant video, but I decided to turn it into a discussion mostly because my friend KaptainKaos really wanted to know my take on everything that was happening after we did the episodic roast on the TCP channel. And while I think a rant would have been great just to rustle some jimmies, it probably wouldn't have turned out as well as this discussion. So with that all said, I hope you all enjoyed the discussion, and I will see you in the next video. Hello, how's it going? I am here with Mr. KaptainKaos.
What's going on?
Yeah, just me and him today, and we are going to be talking about Resident Evil 7 and just a lot of the fanboys and just fans that seem to be defending the game really heavily, and just kind of other stuff revolving around the game, whether it be the game itself or just anything that Capcom said about it. So we're going to get right into this discussion with question number 1. So this is the first and probably the last thing we do on Resident Evil 7 post-launch. How do you feel about the game's review scores?
I haven't actually, I kind of predicted this would happen, is that the review scores from the major gaming websites would be really high, while, the user scores would be low. And it's a little bit 50-50. Like, the user scores are, I want to say, I think from what I've heard, they're mostly 70 or something like that. While the major gaming publications are 90 or something. So I was kind of right about them, at least. But I don't know. It's that's all I really heard about it. I don't know if you've gone more into it.
I've taken a look at the review scores because I was just just kind of poking around because curiosity is what piqued my interest with this because I really wanted to see how people were going to react. And we had a lot of 8s, 9s, and 10s before the game came out, and I was just thinking to myself, this is a lot like DMC, where everyone was giving it high fucking scores and praising it like it was the most perfect game ever, And when you actually look at it, it's not so much. I know fanboys, and we'll kind of get to that a little bit in number 2, but weren't so happy with some review scores. Hello, IGN. But and then I kind of looked up in Metacritic, and we had Time and another one. Time gave it, as far as reviewers are concerned, even a lower score than what IGN gave it. They gave it a 50.
Wow.
Yeah, on Metacritic, which is really crazy. But and then I looked between all the platforms, what the game's been getting. For the most part, it seems for the user score, it's not higher than an 8. It seems to be around a 7.5 to a 7. I think the Xbox version is exactly a 7, whereas the PC and PS4 versions are 7.5 overall for user scores. Whereas for critic scores, it's 8.3 or something like that. And yeah, from what I've seen with user scores, a lot of negative, whether those a lot of negative review scores, whether those be trolls or not, take that all with a grain of salt, of course. I mean, even good review scores that praise the game fully, I mean, might as well just take those with a grain of salt as well, because they might not even be critical at all. They could just be oh, well, the game's 10 out of 10, I liked it, just to follow the crowd. And that's kind of the same thing with saying you don't like the game. So it's not so much mixed, it's either one or the other, although there have been a few mixed where, some people are, trying to be fair and trying to see both sides of the argument.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to let you read off number 2.
Okay. So to follow up with the last question, what was your reaction to fans and fanboys overhyping the review scores? Also, what would you personally give the game? I'll let you go ahead with this.
I would say that what really bothered me and kind of influenced me to make this particular discussion, and originally it was going to be a rant, but it was because of how fanboys were reacting. Because, you know, they were like, oh my god, the game's getting a 9 and 10. Where are all those fans that said they didn't like the game? Where are they now?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, you know, this kind of goes back to the whole idea of, you know, if somebody doesn't like something, I don't think they're gonna go out of their way to get, like in this case, Resident Evil 7, I don't think somebody's gonna go out of their way to hit the dislike button on every single Resident Evil video, you know, every single Resident Evil 7 video. They're gonna go out of their way to make bad reviews and shit talk it all day, you know? I don't think they're gonna do that. Granted, you know, I do think that there will be some people that are vocal. I'm pretty vocal about it myself. But, you know, I'm not gonna, like, for, using myself as an example, personal example, I wouldn't go out of my way to hit the dislike on every single RE7 video, even though I will have something to say if I see, you know, something stupid, like Kawada saying something really dumb, only to have the director contradict everything that he said, you know. If it's something like that, I will have something to say about it. Or, you know, if it's like the review scores, I had something to say about it, and, you know, I said that it's just a bunch of fanboys circle jerking each other over review scores. I personally think that a 9 and 8 9s and 10s are way too high for this game. IGN's review, you know, where they gave it a 7.7, while I still personally think that it's a little bit too high, it's more fair. It's more of a realistic score. Personally,
which is surprising.
Yeah, it really is. And personally, I think that, you know, I wouldn't give this game anything lower than a 4, but nothing higher than a 5. But that's just me personally.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess with the whole, like, fanboys overhyping review scores, I just think it's ironic because these are probably the very same people that get upset over, like, websites like, you know, the major gaming websites giving high review scores to other games when they don't deserve it. And yet, you know, they're saying, oh, look at the review scores that they're giving this game, even though they were probably just paid off by Capcom to give it that review score. So I just find that funny. But, you know, as for what I would personally give it, I haven't seen too much of the game. I haven't even really played it, but from what I've seen and from what I played the demo, like, I've seen enough to know that it does not in any way seem to really resemble a Resident Evil game. To me, it seems like a hollow shell of a Resident Evil game in that it has references to the original Resident Evil games. It has, like, the puzzles, and it tries to resemble the old Resident Evil games, and, like, its puzzles and some other mechanics, like the item boxes. But other than that, it feels to me more like it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the video game, or something like that. It does not feel like a Resident Evil game. The setting is completely different. There's hardly any zombies. There's the BOWs, and you're mostly being chased around by rednecks. You know, and I know it's people are going to say, well, Resident Evil 4 was also a massive departure for the series, but at the same time, Resident Evil 4 still had the characters from Resident Evil. It still had the setting from Resident Evil. Here, it doesn't even feel like it has any of that. That's my major problem with it. Not to mention, from what I've seen of the gameplay streams for this game, it looks like the BOWs that are in this game are incredibly easy. You can kill them within, like, a few hits from an SMG, and it just doesn't seem like there's any sort of challenge or tension to the game. So personally, from all that, from what I've seen so far, I'd probably just say it's a 6 for me. Like, it's just average at best. If it weren't a Resident Evil game, and if it were just its own thing, I might have given it a little bit of a higher score, but because it is one, I'm kind of holding it to a higher standard. So therefore, I would just give it a lower score because it's trying to be a part of the Resident Evil series.
Yeah, and that
kind of pretty much fails, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's definitely understandable. I mean, it's you know, and I think people fail to understand that too. It's like, when people are not giving it a 9 or a 10, it's because they look at the game and they're saying, well, it's not meeting a certain standard that this franchise has set up. Granted, you know, the last few games have not met that standard either, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't hold up the next few games up to that standard, you know?
Yeah.
And I just want to ask you because I kind of talked a little bit about it. How do you feel about like a lot of these fanboys going around and saying like, that people who had complaints about the game were wrong or that they had no right to complain about it whatsoever?
No, I still think that you could see just from the gameplay, they're kind of right about most of their complaints. I mean, maybe it's not as bad. Like, I'll say this, it's probably not as bad as I thought it was going to be initially, but it's not much, it's not amazing or anything like that. So I don't know. I don't think that just because, the game got some good review scores from some websites who were shilling out for Capcom, makes it a good game. I still have the same opinion I pretty much had when I played the beginning hour demo. I think that demo was pretty representative of pretty much how the entire game would play like for the most part.
Yeah, yeah. I think we talked a little bit about that in the episodic roast, and it was just yeah, it was pathetic when we saw those leaks too.
Yeah, that beginning hour demo that ended up being what the entire game is like, except maybe, so the entire game from what I've seen, at least from like the first hour or two, is, it's mostly the same as you're looking for items. You're, running around the house. You're not really fighting much of anything. You're mostly running away from the rednecks. Like, I think it was, what's the main guy?
Oh, Jack.
Yeah, Jack. You're mostly running away from Jack. And then, like, there's some boss fights in between, and you occasionally fight those BLW, whatever they're called. You fight them occasionally, and then you occasionally solve some puzzles, and it's not really, like, there's no zombies, there's nothing like that, there's no, you don't have to worry about ammo conservation or, anything like that. It's just, there's no survival horror elements there. It's just, it's mostly just, like an Outlast game. I know I've made that comparison 1,000 times, but it's true.
Yeah,
it just plays like one.
It kind of sounds like exactly what I had said on the episodic roast, where Capcom for the franchise seems to have forgotten as far as like the later games are concerned. Okay, yeah, I was mentioning that in the episodic roast. I had mentioned that Capcom has this issue, at least has had this issue for a while, where they kind of put survival on the back burner and just completely forgot about it. And at one point they completely forgot about what horror was too. Now with 7, they have horror up at the forefront, but they're still forgetting the survival aspect. And I think a lot of people forget that Resident Evil has always been a game about survival. They've never been about horror. Horror has been more of the backdrop than anything. It's just more of the type of setting and genre that the game is about. But survival was something that the games had a big part in.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna let you read off number 3.
Okay. It's obvious that this game has divided people, possibly even more than Resident Evil 4, but unlike 4, no one seems to agree on whether or not if the game itself is good. How do you feel about this?
Oh, sorry. So, I think that as far as this game is concerned, it's like the question describes. I mean, with 4, at least people can agree that the game, as far as what it did, it was good. As a game on its own, it was good. The standards that it set for third-person shooters, it was good. Overall, it was good, even if you didn't like it as a Resident Evil game. With 7, it's more of you either like it or you don't.
Yeah. Well, not to mention it just doesn't feel like a Resident Evil game, which is my main gripe with it. Regardless of what you say about 4, you could still say it's a Resident Evil game. I can't say that about 7, though.
Yeah, that's very true.
And I think that a lot of them also buy into that whole, like, it's a return to the roots thing. Like, it's just having a lot of faith in Capcom. And, Capcom has fucked many fans over many times before. And I feel like they've been betrayed so many times. They want to believe that Capcom is going to come back and, with the survival horror Resident Evil game. And, it's partly that too, is they really want it to be good, even if it might not be. They want it to be more than what it turned out to be, I guess. And it's just, all it is to me is it's average, but a lot of people make it out to be like it's this amazing thing. Like it is a return to roots, which I really don't see.
Yeah, and I think we talk about a little bit about that more later on in the doc. But
yeah, right. We do address that directly.
Yeah, I think it's more of people, and I've said this in private a little bit too, but I think it's a lot of people are coming into this game with nostalgia goggles on, and I know that's kind of weird to say because a lot of people who were saying that if you don't like the
it's
game,
funny you mentioned that too, and I don't mean to cut you off, but
I think we're gonna say the same thing, where people who like the game are saying that people who don't like it are wearing nostalgia goggles on, right?
Well, I was gonna say that it's also mentioning the nostalgia goggles thing, that the game tries to kind of bank off of the nostalgia factor with all the item boxes and the tape recorder being the like the typewriter and all that kind of stuff, but it's more, that's really all it is though, is it's just like, hey, do you remember this, more than, oh, this is here and it serves a purpose. It's just kind of there for the nostalgia factor and just for references.
Yeah, and like I said, I feel as though that's how people are kind of coming into this game. They're like, oh well, I remember this. This was an old Resident Evil. Therefore I like it. And I kind of talked about this in the rant that I did for the game, addressing Masachika Kawada's statement. They can put in things from previous Resident Evil games. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good game, because by that logic, you have Operation Raccoon City, you have Resident Evil 6. I'm sorry. Let me go back to Operation Raccoon City really quick. But that game, they were really pushing the fact that, oh, there were zombies and they're going back to Raccoon City. That was part of the promotion and the PR, and they were pushing that as if that was going to make it a good game. Then you had Resident Evil 6, and I think they were also pushing the fact that Leon's campaign had zombies. It was the first mainline Resident Evil game to bring back zombies. And then you had Umbrella Corps, and Umbrella Corps is a spin-off shooter, but it has zombies, and the whole point of my argument for that was that all three of those games, they have things that are or that would be recognizable to a franchise, or to this franchise at least, but a lot of those games aren't good. Resident Evil 6, depending on who you ask, some people might really like it, some people might find it to be a decent game, others might find it to be one of the worst pieces of shit Capcom has ever produced. But at the end of the day, the point still stands, is that it doesn't necessarily mean that because they have those things that all of a sudden the game is good. And I think a lot of people forget that it's also you also have to take into consideration gameplay and story, especially with Resident Evil. A lot of those things, if they don't come together well, it's just going to fall apart flat.
Yeah, and I feel like that's just kind of a trend with Capcom saying, oh, this Resident Evil game is going to be going back to Raccoon City. This is going to have zombies. This game is going to be going back to roots. It's just a way for them to hype it up. And most of the time, the games end up being trash or just not very good. And this game, I mean, I don't think it's garbage, but it's they tried to build up a lot of hype around it, and I feel like a lot of people really bought into the hype.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely can see that point too. So we're gonna move on to number 4. I think I read off number 3, right?
I read off the last one.
Oh, okay. How do you feel knowing that fanboys have gotten upset over review scores that were fair or poor? This is in reference to the IGN review score specifically. I don't. Yeah, where they're just like, they gave it a 7.7, but then they gave 6 a 7.9. I actually thought that was a fair score. Now, granted, I hear that the reviewer in question has a questionable track record as far as like what they've played and reviewed, and what they play in their spare time. But Aside from that, I don't think that's. I think that's fair. You know, again, going back to what I said, while I think that I think that's also a little bit too high, and I would personally give it a 4, and nothing higher than a 5, nothing lower than a 4, and that was my personal opinion. But that said, you know, 7 can be considered good. I don't know why people are, you know, flipping their shit over that.
Yeah, I just think it's you know, people trying to police review scores, you know, and it's just fanboyism. Like, you know, they want to believe that this game is the next best game in the Resident Evil series, and if somebody says otherwise, then they start a witch hunt around that person. Like, you know, oh, they gave it a bad review score, even though it's really not bad.
Yeah.
But we've seen this trend with other things too, and it's not just exclusive to Resident Evil. It's like with any with a lot of games, this does end up happening too. But it's usually with like more popular franchises. You know, they give a reviewer gives it a bad score, then people are gonna have his, you know, go after him for it.
Yeah, and I think with Resident Evil, it's a little bit worse though, because people.
Because of the fan base.
Yeah, I think ever since 7, I don't know about you, but like personally, I feel as though I have grown to despise this fan base more and more because of the way that they act. I feel as though they're very immature. You know, they can't handle differences of opinion. They can't handle, you know, low review scores. It's just childish, and it's actually kind of one of the reasons why I've personally considered, you know, kind of straying away from doing Resident Evil and potentially even Capcom, you know, based content, because of the way that, you know, not only Resident Evil fans act, but just Capcom fans act.
Yeah, I can see that.
So,
yeah, I was just gonna say it's just a pretty ridiculous situation. It's like nobody can have an opinion about the game unless it's like the right opinion. Unless you have an opinion like, oh, it's the best thing ever.
Yeah,
you can't say anything negative about it.
Yeah, it's almost as bad as how Street Fighter fans are. I mean, we've heard about people getting completely, you know, harassed, you know, over a bad fucking review score. It's like really.
Oh, is this like, for Street Fighter 5?
Yeah. It's like almost the same thing, and I think what people really need to realize is that a bad review score is not going to stop you from enjoying your game, though, is it?
Yeah, I mean, like if that's
people
another thing. Like that's another thing. If you really enjoyed the game, like go play the game and enjoy the game. Why does somebody else's opinion of it have to affect that for you? If you really did enjoy the game. And if you weren't just trying to, you know, I feel like I said before in another video, like this is just the buyer's remorse, because I really don't feel like they think the game deep down is really as good as they think it is, and they're going after other people because they want, you know, their, you know, they want a verification for what they bought. They want it to actually have meant something, you know. They want people to say, oh well, this is really good, you should feel good that you got this game.
Yeah, just justifying the purchase, basically.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, I think a perfect example of like what they can never do is like, I mean, we talk about in private about a lot of games. I think we've talked about, I know The Evil Within is something we have very jarring opinions on. You know,
yeah.
we have very differing opinions on it, rather.
Well, I would say The Evil Within even is like a better representation of like a Resident Evil game than a Resident Evil 7.
Right, but the point that I was trying to get at was that, you know, we could have that conversation, right, and see each other's, you know, opinions on that and leave it at that. Whereas like somebody who likes a Capcom game, they just can't handle it. You know, they see it as like a challenge. Especially, you know, and again, especially with these Resident Evil fanboys, they just cannot handle it.
Yeah, well, fanboys are irrational. I mean, they can't have a civil discussion about why they dislike or why they like a game. It's just, if you don't like the game, you're just wrong.
Yeah.
That's how the mentality works. But I guess I'll go ahead and read off the next question if we don't have anything else to say about this one.
Yeah, I think we're good.
What are your thoughts on people saying that fans that had complaints were wrong or that they should stop bitching?
Oh.
Um,
You want to go first on this one?
it's yeah, you can go ahead.
So, yeah, this is kind of going back to just me seeing like how people were acting online with like the review scores. Yeah, you know, you just had to be on Twitter, either the day before launch or on launch to see people just saying that, you know, people who were, you know, people who were hyping up those review scores. Oh, people who didn't buy into it are wrong. People who didn't like it need to stop bitching. And this was the mentality they were going with. And I don't know about you, but the way that I see this is that if you wanted to burn bridges and prevent anyone from ever really giving the game that you like any sort of chance, that would be the way to do it. That would be the absolute way to do it, because you're basically instigating, and it's not like, granted, 2 days after the fact, I started seeing people with more average, more calm opinions on it, and we're saying like, hey, you know, at least give it a shot. If you don't like it, you don't like it, that's fine, you know, but, you know, try it out. This is why I like it, you know, maybe you'll like it for that reason too, maybe not, you know. Whereas on the first 2 days, you know, post-launch and launch day, or I'm sorry, pre-launch and then launch day, it was just, how dare you not like this game? This game is getting 9s and 10s. You're wrong for having your criticisms against it. Like, what?
Like, I feel like that whole thing, like, you know, it just goes back to the whole hype culture. It's like people were really hyped for the game and they wanted it to be like amazing. And, you know, and why it kind of evened out later was because people realized, oh, hey, this isn't as good as people were saying it was. You know, and they're like, well, this isn't, you know, either the review scores are not right or, you know, something else. But I think it just has to do with that. It's like, you know, when the first game first came out, it's like, well, this is going to be the best, you know, the best Resident Evil game in years. And that's what people wanted. And, you know, some of them want to live in the delusion like, yes, it is, but it's obviously not. But I think that probably has something to do with it. You know, it's like, well, this game is going to be the best, you know, it's going to be a return to roots, like Capcom said. And, you know, it's just, you shouldn't have faith in a company like that. And when, especially Capcom, when they're going to tell you something like that, you know, you know, they're not telling the whole truth.
Yeah. And I think people also forget this is Capcom. You know, Capcom hasn't been good in over a decade now.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know why why they would think that this is going to be any different from what they've done before. You know, granted, in my opinion, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, but that's not really saying too much. But you know, it's Capcom doing the same things they've always done. It's them lying about something or just telling you something and it, you know, trying to basically hype up the game to be something it's not.
Yeah.
And, you know, they've done this for years. And I just think people are suckers if they're going to buy into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Not to mention they're telling other people to. So it's like, you know, they're trying to, you know, get other people to buy this game that is not, you know, really all that it's cracked up to be. It's just most of these fanboys, like you've been saying. It's like, oh, hey, look, you know, this game is amazing. You need to go buy it right now. And it's, you know, it's just not as good as you people think it's going to be. And,
yeah. And I'm glad you brought up, like, people buying it and whatnot, because I actually want to kind of segue into number 6, because it's kind of relevant to that point. Okay. Recently, Capcom had made a statement on the amount of units shipped, not sold, claiming that 2.5 million units have been shipped and that they hope by March to get 4 million units sold. How many units do you think have actually been sold?
I think didn't it say somewhere it was like 2 million units or something like that?
It was 2.5 million
2.5
shipped, not sold.
How much again were they expecting for?
Four.
4.
They were expecting 4 million sold, but all they said in the recent statement was that 2.5 have been shipped. Meaning that
I feel like if they were confident in that, they had gotten at least close to that number, they would be telling you exactly how many units have been sold.
They would have said sold and not shipped at that point. Because I think a lot of people forget too is that there's a difference between shipped and sold. Shipped just means they shipped out 2.5 million units. Sold would have meant that 2.5 million people, or at least people, if they bought multiple copies, 2.5 million copies have been sold in the world. That's what that would have meant. But they just said shipped. So you would have to assume, based on that number, that there is some amount that have been sold, but it's probably not 2.5 million. It has to be lower than that. It probably is half of that amount, if not a little less than half. I'm willing to bet, and I think I've seen people even say this too, that it's probably like 1.25 million at best.
Probably.
And that probably seems a little more likely. They're hoping to get that 4 million by March.
I don't think that'll happen.
And I wanna kind of talk about this because I think we've talked about this in the past on the TCP podcast, where Capcom doesn't deem a game successful until some time has passed. A case in point, you could look at Resident Evil 6 and DMC Devil May Cry. They didn't deem those games financial successes until some time has passed. So I think that's what's going to happen. Even if it did get that sales amount by March, that still just goes to show you that they did not deem this game a success until some time has passed. Therefore, it was not a success at launch in their eyes.
Yeah, not what they were hoping for.
So, I'm going to let you read off number 7.
Okay. I think these are the questions I wrote. So, number 7, I just asked, how do you feel about Capcom's claims of returning to roots, but the game being a massive departure from what we are familiar with previous Resident Evil titles? I kind of touched on this already, but that was kind of my main gripe about 7, is that it's, we mentioned this many times before, but it feels like a lot of the the horror games that have come out in recent years, it doesn't feel like it's much different than that. It just feels like it's trying to follow the same formula. The only real difference being that you can defend yourself in this. But I would actually argue that even from what I've seen of the game, that kind of even takes away from the tension, because you can, like I said, you can kill those the BOWs with like a good like 4 shots of a SMG, And I was watching a gameplay stream. The person had I think it was 30 some bullets in his SMG, and it doesn't take that many bullets to take down those BOWs. So it's not much of it's really not much of a challenge.
Yeah, and we talked about this on the episodic roast, where you had the producer saying, Masachika Kawada, who is also the producer of Umbrella Corps, and he's like, well, I wouldn't say it's the hardest game in the series. Then you had the director, he's like, yeah, no, this is the hardest game in the series. I hope you all enjoy it. Like, what? And I feel like a circus went on in the development process, and in the it's Resident Evil 7's development team is just run by circus clowns. I see Masachika Kawada as the biggest clown. I like to refer to him as Japanese Ronald McDonald. He has the hair for it. I mean, we can. I hope somebody photoshops that, by the way. But I like to refer to him as such because he's just a clown. He can't produce a game to save his life. Now, granted, he was involved in some average games prior, but average doesn't necessarily mean that he's struck gold. And a lot of his past involvements with Capcom has just been as a background designer. So I wouldn't take anything he says or does seriously, because it's just nothing particularly noteworthy as far as like anything, as far as him producing at least is concerned. But you know, the way that I see it is that Capcom, them saying that they're returning to roots is not necessarily accurate. Returning to horror may be a little bit more accurate, but it kind of goes back to what I said earlier with, you know...
I mean, that's slightly true. They did, you know, they did try to do a horror game. I will give them that. They did try. I won't say they didn't try. They tried to do like a, you know, to make it more horror, you know, more like a horror game.
Yeah, and what I was saying is that, you know, yeah, you can give them that, you know, going back to horror, yeah, that's a lot more accurate than saying going back to roots. I would say, and this is going back to what I said again, where the series has never been known for horror, it's been known for survival, but people seem to forget that. And I think, you know, from a fan perspective, I guess, it's nice to see that the horror kind of came back, but at the same time, the way that it came back is what the issue is, because it just kind of comes off as a cheap knockoff of other first-person horror games. I personally have argued, and in the past at least, I've personally argued that the game either should have been a spin-off title, you know, specifically made as a VR sort of test the waters kind of game, you know, tech demo, I guess you can refer to it as, or a Sweet Home reboot. Because if anybody doesn't remember, Sweet Home is what inspired Resident Evil, so why not kind of bring that back into the forefront?
Yeah. I kind of wanted to bring this up as a little bit of a comparison too. I know it's really, really out there, but I feel like it's kind of accurate because you know, they were talking about how like Evil Dead was a big influence, and you know, like the original Evil Dead movies, they were pretty quirky. They were scary. Like the original was pretty serious at times, but then they did like that reboot. It was like an Evil Dead reboot, and it was completely serious, and it was just a huge gore fest, and it kind of forgot about a lot of the things that made the original movies great. And I feel like it's a similar case here with this game.
Yeah.
Where it's like they forgot about like what made the original game so good. They think they know, but they really don't, and they just kind of went with like what's, you know, what's popular and what's trending right now, which is kind of what would happen with the Evil Dead reboot. Was, you know, a lot of these, you know, is another by the numbers like horror movie where it's just a huge, like it's just a gore fest that people are getting just fucking torn apart, stuff like that. It doesn't really have much substance to it. And that's the problem.
Yeah, and I think, you know, they said they used Evil Dead as a big basis for that game. A lot of people like to compare the game to Evil Dead 2013, from what I've been seeing, which is kind of funny. Because
that's kind of funny. They're comparing it to the 2013 one.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. But
that's not a good comparison because, like, I don't think it's a terrible movie, but it's not good. Like, it's...
yeah, no, but I you know, all I'm saying is that like when your game doesn't look like what it's supposed to, and it looks like other things that you were taking inspiration from, it's when you start to have a problem. I personally think that, you know, if they wanted to do this right, they should have at least gone back and played some of the older games and look at that and be like, okay, this is what people like. What did we fail to do with these games? Like, let's take what people like from these games, but let's also look at what we failed to do with these games and try to improve on some of these formulas that maybe we didn't have a chance to do. And that's why I was saying in the episodic roast, you know, a perfect example of going back to roots is Doom 2016. Because Doom, you know, is a lot like classic Doom, but it also introduces a lot of new things that weren't in the originals. And that's great. Yeah, that's how you go back to roots done right.
It's,
you know?
It's a good blend of like the modern and the old school.
Yeah,
and you know, that's how you do that right.
yeah, and I think that you know, they could have been like, hey, you know what? We tried this thing with Resident Evil 4, but we kind of cut this as a concept, the 3.5 beta. Maybe we can go back to that, or you know, we're supposed to be interviewing the Invader Studios devs sometime in the future, but they're doing Daymare 1998, and it's like a blend of classic and over-the-shoulder Resident Evil, but if it can work, you know, do something like that. And I mean, you have the Revelation series that should, you know, while it's not perfect, it's a great basis to kind of, you know, look at and be like, hey, you know, not perfect, but what can we do to improve that formula?
Yeah.
But they just don't do that. They just kind of are like, what's popular, what's trending, let's get on that.
It just doesn't seem like they learn from their mistakes.
They really didn't, and I'm hoping, you know, we don't have any info really on Resident Evil 2 remake, but I'm hoping because of the two teams that are involved with that particular remake, I'm hoping that what we get out of that is more akin to what is actually going back to roots. And maybe if that remake does really well, they'll look at that and be like, this is what Resident Evil 8 needs to be like.
Yeah. Well, if there is a Resident Evil 8.
Well, you know they're not going to end this cash cow. That's the
true.
unfortunate part. Like, I would much rather have the series end because, you know, Capcom has, you know, the psychological horror and Revelations 2, now this fucking wannabe House of a Thousand Corpses knockoff over here. You know, it's like, come on now. I think this is a great time to just put the series on hiatus, give it a good 5 years, maybe 10 years max, and then come back to it. Maybe even reboot it, so that way you don't have to be like, okay, well, now we can do whatever we want with it.
So I don't know if you brought this up or if I heard this somewhere else, but this isn't in the document, but what do you think of like people saying that they came that it's more the title is more fitting for this game because you're in a residence or something? That's what I heard somewhere.
Yeah, James was talking about that. James, shout out to James, by the way, but he was the one that kept talking about that. He really wanted to know my thoughts to this. So if you're watching this, James, which I'm pretty sure he is, let me elaborate as best as I can with this. That is the dumbest comparison because the word resident can apply to different things. It's supposed to mean like living in the case of Resident Evil. You know, it's supposed to mean living evil. You know, it's kind of obvious. Whereas vice versa in Japan, it's biohazard because, you know, you have a living hazard. You know, it's how the title works. I mean, this is kind of obvious.
Yeah.
But this title just doesn't work. Like, by the logic they're going with, technically this title works for Resident Evil 1 because you're going around in the house, right?
Yeah, you're in the Spencer Mansion. You're in a residence in the first game.
Like,
too.
it's stupid. Like, I don't get this analogy that they're trying to go with. It's a very dumb comparison. It's almost about as dumb as fucking Masachika Kawada saying that familiarity means that the game will be good. You know,
no, just because you introduce a concept
immersive,
familiar.
You know?
Yeah.
But we've been diverging a little bit, so I think you took on number 7, so I will read on number 8. Is this the worst Resident Evil game in the series? Yeah, see, that's kind of hard for me to say because on the one hand, I can definitely say it's the worst mainline title to date, but is it the worst game in the series? No, I think that title goes to Resident Evil Gaiden. There is no game that will beat that.
I heard that was pretty bad.
Yeah, that there is no game in the series that will top Resident Evil Gaiden as far as really bad, shitty Resident Evil title is concerned.
The only thing I remember hearing about that was that it was like an RPG.
It, from what I've seen, it basically plays like Sweet Home, but not as good. Not as good. Yeah, because it's on like Game Boy, I think, or something like that. It's really
Yeah.
weird.
I haven't played that many Resident Evil games, so I can't say if it's the worst or not. I mean, I guess I'd say it's like the worst that I've played. But I haven't played like Gaiden or anything, so I'm pretty sure if I played that, I would agree. But
Oh, I mean, I haven't played Gaiden either. I just know a lot about it.
But yeah, I've only like I think I've played 4. The first game, the original one on PS1, 0. A little bit of the remake of Resident Evil 1. But you know, having played those, it's like I can't. I mean, that probably is the worst one I've played so far. Because it does not even resemble a Resident Evil game.
I mean, if that, like, because you're you're not really into the Resident Evil games as much as I am. I mean, that should tell you something right there. Like,
yeah,
if somebody who's not really into the Resident Evil games can say,
well, I know
it's
like I know what it's about though. Like I can tell you what it's about, like,
right,
easily.
Right, but my point is that like if somebody who's not as into the games as someone who is a fan, right, that should tell you, you know, you've
I mean that's sad.
So I'm gonna let you take on number 9.
Okay, this is another one that I came up with. But what are your thoughts on there not being any zombies in the game other than the BOWs and the redneck enemies? I kind of touched on this a little bit already, but I'll just go ahead and I guess add more to it. I just find it to be incredibly lazy. You know, that you're mostly just running away from this crazy ass family that's infected. And that's the whole gimmick, is that they're infected and that, you know, no matter how much you fight them, they'll continue to regenerate, you know, and that's supposed to be real scary, I guess. But you're mostly running away from them. And then there's the BOWs that you occasionally encounter. And you have to fight them, and it's really not much of a challenge, like I said, because you can take them out pretty easily. And I believe there might be another one that I think
there are variations of the molded the black monsters, but they're not that's too different from each other. They're mostly just right.
Like it's more or less the same enemy. I mean, there's
and then I think there's like, from what I've been told, apparently there's like a mosquito that takes like 1 hit to kill.
I mean, that would have been creepy if it were a tougher enemy, and if it, like, you know, I mean that's the main problem, is that the enemies are really weak.
I mean, well, to be fair, there are enemies that in past Resident Evil games that could be killed in 1 hit. There's no denying that, but
another difference
when you have that lack of variety in terms of enemy designs and whatnot, and you have, like, you know, you have the Bakers who only end up dying through the boss fights, permanently at least. Then you have the Molded, which in some cases, if you just leave the room, they just all of a sudden disappear. You know, and then you have that mosquito thing. It's like, that's your variety right there.
I mean, also in the older Resident Evil games, there were more enemies too. You had to worry about more enemies. Like, if you go into a room and there's like an item at the end of the room or something, there's a bunch of enemies you have to get by. Like, it's like, well, how are you going to approach the situation? You just like mow through the enemies, or you know, in some situations you could go around the enemies and get the item and maybe take a hit or two. It's like, you kind of have to think it through. Like, what do you want to use? Do you want to use up ammo, or do you want to risk getting hit? You know, you could not get hit, but or do you want to risk getting hit and use up like your health items or something like that?
Yeah,
you know, that's the kind of strategy that comes in with that. You don't have any of that in 7.
In comparison, I mean, you could just look at the Resident Evil remake. Resident Evil remake introduces a new enemy type, which is the Crimson Head. So basically, enemies that you've killed, at least zombies, can come back and become stronger and faster. That's a whole nother mechanic you have to worry about, because you have to burn the bodies and whatnot, unless if you decapitate them or delimb them, but that's a whole nother discussion right there. You have zombies, Crimson Heads, you have the crows, dogs, you have some hunters, you have I think there were also insects towards the end of the game, and some snakes at one point as well. So that's 7 different enemy types as opposed to 3. Do you see the difference there? And that's just in the first game alone. And we're not even talking about bosses, because, you know, we don't have that same effect where, like in Nemesis, one of the main bosses is something that chases you throughout the game, like in 7. You know, even if you look at 3 had a vast amount of enemy types. You had, you know, various different hunter variations. You had zombies. You had insects. You had all sorts of different things there. What does this game introduce but 3 enemy types? You know, it's like that's your variety there. Like, really?
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, but you know, people will say, oh well, there are zombies in the game, and I think we talked about the photogrammetry development process, which is an interesting process, no doubt. Pretty much the same process that Kojima did with,
like I said, that's the only thing I could say. You know, one of the few things I could say that's like really good about the game is that, you know, photogrammetry and how they did the graphics, you know, it's really nice.
Yeah. So we're gonna end off this discussion. Are there any closing thoughts you'd like to give out before we end?
I mean, you know, the game could have. I think we all should have seen this coming. Honestly, we all should have seen that this game was going to be at best just average to mediocre, and you know. I kind of saw this. I knew that what kind of response this would get from a lot of people. I knew that there would be people on either side, you know, people saying that this game's the next best Resident Evil game because of the way that Capcom was advertising it and because of the things that they were saying about it. And then on the other side, you've got, you know, people saying it's terrible. And, you know, it might not be terrible, but it's not good. That's certainly not good. You know, and it's certainly not a return to roots like they were saying. And, you know, I just find it's interesting because, you know, Capcom has stabbed us in the back multiple times when it comes to the Resident Evil series. And I mean, this time it's not as bad, but it's not really much different. You know, they're saying one thing about the game, but it's something completely different. So, you know, it's just another example of that. And these same people that were probably complaining about Resident Evil 6 are, you know, praising the hell out of 7, even though 7's not really much better. I mean, it's a slight improvement because it's horror and not like a Michael Bay action fest. But that's not really, like I said, that's not saying too much because it's not Resident Evil forms of horror. It's like, you know, like we've been saying, Texas Chainsaw Massacre or House of a Thousand Corpses horror, which isn't what Resident Evil is known for in the first place. So it's instead of getting a Michael Bay action fest, instead we have a Resident Evil game with an identity crisis, is what I feel like it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you pretty much stole a lot of the words out of my mouth. I to basically kind of sum up what I would say. To me, it's a game that we could have done without. Not saying that it's the worst game ever, because as I mentioned earlier, to me it's the worst numbered title to date, but it's not the worst game in the entire franchise because there are worse titles out there in the franchise.
I guess I should have specified with that question.
Yeah, no, I think it's fine. But I think that you know, looking at what happens afterwards, it's just I'm not too confident, and quite frankly, it's why I said I'm because of 7. I really just want to part ways with the franchise, and the only thing that I'm looking forward to now is the remake, and if they fuck that up, I'm done. I'm done with Resident Evil, and at least in my case, you know, I'm not going to speak for Chaos here or anybody else, but they fuck up something like Devil May Cry again, then I'm fucking like done with Capcom in general. But as far as Resident Evil is concerned, they have one more shot with me as far as you know, or one more chance with me, and after that, it's done.
I'm also looking forward to the remake, and I'm a little bit more confident with the remake, and that's mostly because I know the people behind it are the same ones that were behind the remakes for, or the remake for the first game and Zero.
Yeah,
So
the
I know
Origins
that there are
collection.
people that know what they're doing. So I'm hopeful that it's going to turn out okay. That being the case, and I'm also, interested in the other the Revelations games because they've been pretty good. I mean, I enjoyed them, so I'm, pretty, I'm okay with those. But as for the mainline series, it's just kind of taking a nosedive for a minute. It's been just taking a nosedive for a while now, and it hasn't really improved. I mean, maybe with seven, they did a few things right, I will concede, but a lot of, most of it is pretty just, like I said, mediocre, especially for a Resident Evil game.
Mhm. So, yeah, with that all said, where can we find you, Mr. Captain Chaos?
You can find me on YouTube and Twitter at KaptainKaos. I mostly do Let's Plays, reviews, stuff like that. So if you enjoy that kind of thing, check me out. And also, before you get to yourself, did you want me to host this on my channel, or do you want to put it up on yours?
Oh, I mean, if you wanna put up a mirror of it on your channel, that's
I can
totally
do
fine.
that.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. But anyway, you guys know where to find me. I don't think I really have to say, but for anybody that's new, I guess, you can find me on well, if they're gonna see the mirror too, I guess. You can find me at biodevil_dom on YouTube and on Twitter, and on Twitch as Dom241996. Thanks for sticking around, and I will be heading out to do a cooperative analysis on the Ghost Recon Wildlands single-player demo, so hope to see you there on the TCP channel. See ya.
See you later, guys.